Hello, everyone. Again, we want to comment the gospel, and this is the 24th Sunday of Ordinary Time in the Catholic Christian tradition, and the gospel is still from Mark, still chapter 8, and chapter 8, verses 27 to 35, and it goes like this. Jesus and his disciples left for the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he put this question to his disciples: Who do people say I am? And they told him, John the Baptist. They said, others Elijah, others again one of the prophets. But you, he asked, who do you say that I am? Peter spoke up and said to him, You are the Christ. And he gave them strict orders not to tell anyone about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man was destined to suffer grievously, and to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and to be put to death, and after 3 days to rise again. And he said all this quite openly. Then taking him aside, Peter started to remonstrate with him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said to him, Get behind me, Satan, because the way you think is not God's way, but man's. He called the people and his disciples to him and said, If anyone wants to be a follower of mine, let him renounce himself and take up his cross and follow me. For anyone who wants to save his life will lose it, but anyone who loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. So a complicated message, gospel message, but it continues the message we heard in last Sunday's reading, where we saw the deaf, dumb man who needed to be freed from his incapacity to hear correctly the message and then to pronounce it. And that's what happens to Peter today. Peter is not understanding, as well as the disciples, they're not understanding the depth of Christ's message of freedom. And that's basically the bottom line message in this gospel, is to be free. Free to be able to look towards life and the fullness of life and live that without being kept in slavery or being marginalized from the community. I have to get out from under whatever keeps me from participating in the life of the community. And so Peter announces Christ as, and it seems like it's a good title, oh, you're the Christ. But his thought is about the Christ who is a triumphalistic Christ, who the imagination was that the Savior would come back with a sword, with the image of of King David, and would liberate Israel, re-going to the throne, and he would have all his deputies around him. And Peter and the disciples wanted to be some of these deputies and wanted to share in the power. So they're thinking about the power in this world. And that's why Christ then says, if anyone wants to follow me, he must renounce at himself. So Peter has to renounce to his desire to have power over, and he has to renounce even to his image of freedom, because his image of freedom is tied to this world. And that's also where we have to look at a freedom that isn't of this world, but it's of the next world. And so the work of following Christ, which is as difficult as the work of someone who's been condemned to death. That's why Christ says, take up your cross. Take up your cross means you've been condemned to death. And what it means is that this way is as hard as someone who's been condemned to death and his last mile. That's the longest mile. This is as hard as that. But it's the true way to freedom. So if you're somehow marginalized, you need to look at that you're allowing yourself as well to be marginalized, because the power of this world, if you can sidestep that and say, no, I'm following Christ, the power of this world no longer has power on you, and you'll be a free person. So who's ever keeping you marginalized, it's their problem, and they're using you. So you have to step out and say, no, I'm free. God created me a beautiful person. Whatever category of person I belong to, be that, like we said last week, you're a foreigner in a land where you're not accepted, or you're a member of the LGBT community, and you're kept marginalized. You have to feel yourself loved by God. So sidestep away from the keeping you out. Love yourself and follow the way of freedom, which is then you practicing what Christ practices, That will give you the power to remain on the line of joy, happiness, faithfulness, and that will be filling. You'll find in that your life. And so death doesn't scare me because I have fullness now, and death is only the passage into complete fullness. If I'm basing my happiness and fullness on this life, then death does scare me, because one day I will die. But if I know that that's such a passage, then I'm free, and no one can keep me marginalized at that point. So we need to open our hearts and see that God is inviting us to be free and to be full, and ask Him to illuminate us so that we can take up our cross, take up that way which is a way of becoming, which is a very challenging way. But if I give myself to it, I will be free from what inhibits me to knowing myself and to expressing myself as I am. And that's where I will be able to share that with others, and I'll become a light for others around me. So let's ask God to guide us in this way in this week.